So if I had to point to one band that I've gotten comparisons to or had comments referencing off of some of my intro videos, it'd have to be The War on Drugs. And now every time I get one of these comments or kind of hear those references, it's really pretty flattering. I take it as a huge compliment because the band is actually one of my favorite bands. I've gotten to see them live, and I think they're just a really kind of cool guitar-driven rock band out of Philly that is utilizing effects and different sounds and textures in their music in a really pleasing way, in one that I think is kind of worth a little bit of a dive into. So today we're going to do a video about how to get some of those War on Drugs style guitar tones. We're going to zoom out and talk a little bit about composition and production in general. And then we're going to dive into some gear selection choices, effects types, and signal chains that you can use to create some of those War on Drugs style guitar tones. I'm actually not someone that gets super nuanced or meticulous in the details of some of these sound comparison videos, but I think what I've found as I've listened to and kind of dissected the War on Drugs guitar sound is that it's actually not that complicated. And so I'm hoping this video can kind of illuminate the sounds and the textures that you might be hearing from the War on Drugs albums in a way that's really approachable and frankly pretty easy and quick to recreate on your own. I want to give a shout out to Zoom. They sent over this MS-70 CDR multi-effects pedal that allowed me to really get all the sounds that I needed for this video. You heard it in the intro track there as I was leaning into some of the different effects and some mini signal chains in this multi-effects unit, and it's really a great, concise, compact type of pedal to allow you to pretty quickly and easily create those signal chains with modulation, delay, reverb, kind of package those together and get some cool sounds and tones going right away. So I'll be sharing some of the sounds that I used from the MS-70 CDR, and definitely go check it out if you're looking for something that's pretty approachable, is affordable, and is powerful in the sense of stringing some different sounds and tones together in signal chains there. And if you're interested in the sounds you heard up top in that intro track, definitely hit subscribe and stick around the channel for future videos. I try and write original pieces like that for these videos. It keeps things interesting and fun for me as just sort of an outlet to be creating music and putting that out there in these videos. And I hope it's sort of inspiring or motivating you to do the same in creating and writing and expressing through music and through sound. So let's dive back into the War on Drugs and talk a little bit about composition and production. One of the things that really jumps out to me when I listen to their music is this kind of driving rhythmic force that comes from bass and drums, and also the importance of a really present acoustic guitar track. You heard that in the intro track, and I just kind of started building this track by creating some pretty straightforward drum grooves, a driving bass line, and a double-tracked acoustic guitar that's hard panned left and right to kind of give that presence and kind of shimmery high-end sparkle and rhythm to the composition. From there, I kind of moved to guitar selection, and just based on interviews and videos and live shows I've seen from the War on Drugs, I know that Adam tends to play guitars like the Stratocaster and Jazz Masters, and so I ended up grabbing both of these for the intro track and kind of using them somewhat randomly throughout. But with both, you do get the sort of brighter, kind of more biting texture and timbre from the instrument that tends to shine through a lot of the War on Drugs albums. I'm using a Supro Airwave for my amp. It's kind of been a staple here in the studio the last few months since it's been released, in large part because of convenience. It allows you to go direct, record it into your interface through their 2-notes technology, but it really kind of lends itself well to those War on Drugs textures that do tend to be a little bit gritty, a little bit raspy at times, that have that kind of mid-range warmth and bite. And I know from seeing them live that Adam tends to use a whole handful of different amps, a number of sort of vintage Fender or other pieces that you can kind of get some similar textures and shades from. But as we kind of move along, I would say that the amp choice is somewhat minimal or secondary in the whole equation of the sounds here. You can go a long way with a Fender style amp or just sort of a fairly kind of blank slate or slightly mid forward amp, and then kind of add on those layers of effects that we're going to talk about in a second here to really kind of round out the sound. For almost all of those guitar tracks you heard in the intro, I was using a pretty straightforward 4-effect signal chain in the MS-70 CDR here. It starts out with a compressor, which I think kind of does a nice job pulling everything together. It just kind of helps some of those higher gain moments or some of the kind of out of control type sounds stay a little bit more polished and a little bit tighter without kind of expanding too much or too big. Next, I leaned into some modulation on this pedal. There's a lot of great options to choose from that kind of hit on a lot of the classics. So I was using a vintage style chorus effect for some of the tracks. I was also leaning into a kind of a vintage flanger type effect. For different applications, I was keeping the rate and the depth on those effects more subtle for kind of more background sway. I think that's a huge characteristic of the War on Drugs sound, is that you kind of get lost in this sort of soup and kind of ambience of the whole thing with a steady sway. It just kind of feels like everything is always kind of moving, but in a pleasant and pleasing way. And so those types of effects, chorus, flanger, vibrato, set more mildly with lower rate and lower depth, can kind of give you that effect sort of in the background and do a nice job of that. There are moments in lead parts on the War on Drugs sound where I would dial up a flanger to be a lot more prominent and pronounced. You can really hear the effect happening, and it again just kind of gives those moments a nice pop and a nice kind of texture when you want to jump out and kind of say something interesting with lead lines. From there, I added either a tape style echo or an analog delay for different purposes. Again, to just kind of add to the ambiance, add to the warmth and kind of texture and character of the guitar tone. This effect can kind of feel like an additive or a background effect that just adds to that soup of ambiance that I'm talking about in their guitar tones. But I think it's a useful addition, and again, one that I tend to keep set fairly mild unless there's moments where I really want to have a rhythmic part or something jump out or repeat in a prominent way. And then we round out the signal chain with a nice lush reverb, and you can kind of get away with a number of different types of reverbs, again too, depending on how closely you want to try and mimic a song or a part, or how general you just kind of want to add that ambiance. I think hall reverbs, plate reverbs, certain types of spring reverbs can work really well at the end of that chain to just kind of give some bloom and some ambiance and some kind of lush decay to the textures there. And aside from that, a lot of the gain that was happening, the variations and kind of clean to dirty sounds, was all happening from the amp here. So I would run it in boost mode with the master volume cranked up a little bit for some saturation tones. I dial things back for some cleaner sounds for some of the more rhythm or kind of chordal work. And you can get a lot of mileage out of just those two pieces, the multi effects from Zoom and an amp that has some nice textural range. And as much as it might seem like there's more to the mystery, I kind of think as I wrote that intro track and kind of compared to some of the other tunes in their catalog, you can get pretty close with just those elements and tweaking and kind of dialing in some of the nuances of each of those effects to get you closer to the sound that either you want or that you're hearing on the albums. I had a really fun time just getting to dive into some of my favorite guitar tones and textures and getting to write that intro track. So thanks for coming along for the journey here, for watching the video. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe below. I really appreciate that as it helps support the channel, keeps you up to date with more videos forthcoming here. And thanks again to Zoom for sending over the MS-70 CDR to kind of support this track and this video idea. You'll see some more from this pedal over on Instagram, so check it out over there, and we'll see you next time.